So, Ruth, it is absolutely fantastic to finally have this conversation. It's felt like it's been a technical struggle to get to this point, but we are here and I'm excited to talk to you today. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for persevering.
So I'm going to dive straight into this because we are talking about the important subject of child poverty. But if somebody asks you the question, so what is child poverty in the UK? What do you want them to understand about it in plain English?
I think what people need to understand, there are children in the UK who are hungry, who their parents can't afford to clothe them properly. That may mean they can't go to school sometimes because they've not got, a spare pair of trousers or skirt, whatever. That is, in a sense, at its worst when we're talking about the most basic of needs. But talking to a study that talked to children themselves about it, it's about children not being able to join in the sort of things that their friends might take for granted, the kind of things that we assume children can do in our society, but an awful lot of things cost money, and they don't fit in because they may not have the right clothes, or they can't invite their friends home because they're ashamed of their home, or there isn't, they may be in a temporary accommodation or whatever. So it's really, I won't give you the kind of the technical measure because it's a bit meaningless, I think, for people. But we are talking about serious deprivation of different grades, of course. But it's children who can't enjoy their childhood in the way that other children can.
That's really interesting, actually. As far as I think, when most people tend to think about poverty, they tend to think of something like, as you say, like food deprivation and things like that, or struggling with shelter, but not being able to have the proper uniform. I did a post on LinkedIn that went kind of viral because I disagreed strongly with something that a school put in place, which was they were saying that any children who'd got less than 90% attendance weren't welcome at the school prom, and which I found abhorrent, because, as you said, something like, well, why aren't kids turning up? We might assume it's just because they don't want to, but actually there could be other factors, like you just mentioned there, that may not be aware of. And it's not something that a parent or a child's going to go, well, it's because we can't afford to.
No, absolutely. And we have, there is evidence around schools sending children home because they haven't got the right uniform. And it's not that they're doing contrary, that, the parents can't afford it. The government is doing now something to limit what the uniform requirements will be, but it is still an issue. And they're also, it may be, sometimes children aren't going to school because they've got caring responsibilities at home. So when you put the two together, caring responsibilities and poverty, that is really, really difficult.
Yeah, I think the point you made there as well is that the inclusivity that children will feel, because we do kind of, it used to be cheap to go and play with other kids because the other kids were just all outside playing. Like, you could have a stick and you'd be able to join in. Society's changed so significantly, hasn't it, that the children now are all at clubs and activities, or they're playing with electronics. So to be able to then play with electronics, you need the electronic with them, kind of thing, to be able to engage. So that's really quite interesting as well.
And sometimes, parents tend to be very aware of this, and so they might spend money they haven't got to make sure their children can participate. But then they've got to find the money for other things. They haven't got it. And then other people might say, oh, that's not a very good way to spend your money. But actually, it's so important to their children that they prioritise that over perhaps more what other people might think are more important, fundamental things. So it's those kinds of choices that the parents, have to constantly juggling and making, but trying to help their children fit in. And I think, when you're a child, it's easy to forget for us older people, but when you're a child or an adolescent, it's so important. Things like clothing is so important to your emergent identity. And I think the kind of shame that goes along with poverty is that much harder for children to bear, really.
Well, yeah, because it's through no fault of their own, not as anybody's fault, but it's very much out of their control, and they're helpless in that. So, how many children are living in poverty right now, and what do those numbers really mean?
Well, there are about, there are about 4 million children living in poverty. That's nearly 3 in 10. And so that's 4 million children who can't enjoy the kind of things that other children might be able to take for granted. Their circumstances will differ. Some will be, perhaps just living quite close to the poverty line. Others, and this has been an increasing problem in recent years, are in what we call deep poverty, and that is where the most basic needs are not always being met. So it's I mean, this is a huge number of children.
Yeah, that figure is quite scary, and I should imagine that, as you say, there's different levels of that poverty, and quite a lot of that would not be recognised. It would not be recognised. So how do they draw that line? You said it's obviously a little bit technical and maybe a little bit meaningless, but how do they kind of draw that line of what poverty means?
Well, the way they measure it is, I mean, it is a bit technical. They take average income, and then they say 60%. If you're below 60% of that after your housing costs, because housing costs are actually incredibly important at present in terms of determining poverty, then you are deemed to be in poverty. They're introducing a new measure for deep poverty, which isn't. Which I think will come into operation next year probably, and that will be about sort of deprivation of key things that people need. I'm not sure if they're introducing a particular one for children. I mean, arguably they should. I mean, because the things that are essential for children can sometimes be slightly different to those for adults. So, and this measure, it's a long-standing measure. It's a measure that's used in other countries as well. So it allows us to compare over time, and it allows us to compare with other countries. And we don't compare very well.
Do we not? Where are we kind of sitting typically? Or is this...
Well, I must admit I've not looked at the figures recently, but we certainly don't come out well. Put it like that. Yeah.
Now, one of the myths I think about poverty is mainly about it not being about not working. So, what does the evidence actually say about children in poverty and working families?
Well, 7 in 10 of children in poverty are in a family where at least one parent is in paid work. So, and that has been a shift in recent years. That, I mean, in the past, poverty has been more associated with worklessness or unemployment. That has changed, where it's only a minority now who are in families where no one is in paid work. It makes a difference whether you've got one or two, in a two-parent family, if you've got one or two earners. If you've got two earners, you're much less likely to be in poverty. It's still possible. Lone parents, you can imagine, it's very difficult, but policy is increasingly kind of expected lone parents to take paid work. But there's only so much. I mean, trying to balance your care for your children and your paid work is very difficult. So it is very much. I mean, in work, what's in the jargon is called in work poverty. It has been a growing problem. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a common misconception, isn't it? And
absolutely.
And that must be one of the areas I think that a lot of people do find frustrating, in the fact that there are people who are desperately trying to be able to put clothes on their children's back and their own back and food in their children's mouths. They're not just kind of waiting for everybody to kind of sort it out for them, and yet they're still struggling on a day-to-day.
They're very, very much still struggling, and it is difficult. I mean, when you're combining paid work and caring responsibilities and you don't have enough money, then you can't buy your way out of these problems. You can't and childcare, can be a real difficulty. And politicians kind of quite glibly sometimes say, well, work is the route out, paid work is the route out of poverty. Yes, it's an important route, but it's not a guaranteed route out of poverty. And that's also, I mean, people also forget that, when they go on about Social Security and, other people getting things that they can't get, well, actually, quite a lot of those receiving Social Security help are in paid work.
Mm. Mm. And one of the things you mentioned a little while ago when we were talking about the kind of where the line is as far as poverty, you mentioned after housing costs, and some people may go, well, after housing costs, that's the most important thing. That's all that really matters. Can you explain why housing costs matter so much when we're talking about child poverty?
Well, they've mattered increasingly because, partly because, again, in the past, more people in poverty will have been in social housing where, housing costs still have to be met, but they're not haven't been such an important factor. But increasingly, people in poverty are in private rented accommodation. And I'm sure anyone listening to this or watching this will know, rents have gone up so much, and it's been calculated by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Just to actually double check this figure because I might get it wrong. Here's that 4 in 10 private renters are only in poverty because of their housing costs. So if they weren't paying so much, didn't have to pay so much high rent, and the Social Security support for that, called local housing allowance, has been frozen in many years recently. Just occasionally it gets put up, but so it's not meeting a significant enough proportion of those costs. So it does make a big difference as to whether you measure poverty before or after housing costs.
So what do you feel, if you had to name the top 3 drivers of child poverty in the UK today, what do you think they are?
I'd say the 3 main drivers are housing costs. That is now an important driver of poverty. Social Security, because under the previous government from 2010, during that decade or so, there have been cut after cut in Social Security benefits. And so a lot of academic analysis now suggests that Social Security, the level of Social Security, what the protection it does or does not provide, is absolutely crucial in determining whether people are in poverty or not. So that is probably more than anything has been a driver of the worsening of poverty in recent years, those cuts. And then the third thing I'd say would be the difficulties of combining paid work and care of children, and the kind of barriers that are faced, and those are widespread, but some of them lie in the labour market itself. I was actually at an event yesterday about looking at in-work poverty and what are those barriers, and childcare is an absolutely fundamental one. We do have support for childcare. That's one of the good things in my lifetime, that when I started out, childcare wasn't seen as a public responsibility at all. Now it is, and it is important, I think, to acknowledge where we have seen progress. We've certainly seen progress there, but it's still inadequate. Certainly those researchers found that for many parents, they just struggled because of childcare costs or accessibility, availability, inflexible work, employers not providing the flexibility that parents may need to combine work and care. So I think those kind of 3 things have been driving the worsening of poverty and of child poverty in particular in recent years.
Now, I know you created a report. Your report, The Good Society Starts Small, which talks about I'll try and get my words out. That talks about redistribution, rights and resolve. So what does that look like in real policy terms?
Well, it's partly the sort of accurate, the all the R's, but it's about partly, well, a lot of it's about improving social security. And one of the things that it called for has now happened, which is the abolition of the 2-child limit, which meant that people who had more than parents on universal credit, who had more than 2 children, didn't get any support for the children beyond the first 2. And that was a real driver of poverty in larger families. And that shows up in the figures. So, but lots of other ways that you could improve social security system, extend free school meals. Again, that has partially happened. It's been extended to all primary school, or it's being extended to all primary school children, which is excellent. But teachers and others in the education system say we really could do with it going to children more generally. So there are lots of that kind of, and to do that partly will require paying for it out of taxation, which is where the redistribution comes in. The rights, I think it's important that a lot of this kind of support is provided as a right rather than a discretion. When I started many years ago in this area, a lot of support was discretionary, which meant prejudice could creep in, and people didn't know where they stood. So that's really important. And resolve is really, in a sense, it's about political will, isn't it? I mean, I know we're going through difficult times, but we're still a rich country, and if governments, and I put that in the plural, showed the political will to prioritise tackling child poverty, we would not be in a situation where 4 million children are living in poverty.
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge, and no matter which party it is, there's this kind of 4-year cycle that sometimes the long-term aims kind of fall short a little bit, no matter kind of who's in. Sometimes. Yeah. So a lot of listeners will have heard about the 2-child limit, and I've got somebody in my organisation that struggled as a result of that, the benefit cap, but not really understood them. So what did you find was the impact on families with that 2-child limit? And as you said, there may be some prejudice related to that as well.
Well, first I should say there are 2 separate things, and these often get confused and conflated. There's the 2-child limit and there's the benefit cap, and I'll talk about each of those separately. The 2-child limit, I mean, well, they both have had kind of really dire effects, but the 2-child limit, there's been a lot of research which has just shown that, look, think about it. I mean, if you're already on the breadline and you've got, and you're not getting the support for 2 of your children, you're only getting support for 2 children and you've got, say, 4 children, how on earth do you make ends meet? And so it's an incredible strain on parents, but the children also feel it, and also kind of like it makes I remember from research one example of a child, I think it was a 3rd child, feeling guilty, because the effect it's having on the other children, because of course it's not just the 3rd, 4th child, it affects the 1st and 2nd child as well, because you're not going to say, oh, well, sorry, you can't have anything because we don't have money for you, we're just giving it to the 1st and 2nd child. I mean, it really, and it didn't, it's argued, that, people need to be responsible and everything, but people, when they have children, their lives might be fine. They may be, in a good job, whatever, and things can go wrong. And then you end up on universal credit and find that, you're not getting the support. So, and it didn't, the research suggests that it hasn't had met its own objectives of encouraging people, not to have more children, or getting people into paid work, because again, the majority of those affected are actually in paid work. It's not about work incentives at all. So and everybody argued that if the government is going to introduce a child poverty strategy, which it now is doing, the one change it could make, which would have the most impact immediately on the numbers of children in poverty was to abolish the 2-child limit. And on the latest figures, I think it's estimated that will reduce the number of children in poverty by about 350,000, which is really a lot. I mean, it still leaves far too many, but it is a really important first step. But some of those children who will be lifted out of poverty because of the abolition of the 2-child limit, in fact, won't be lifted out of poverty because of the benefit cap. And the benefit cap affects the total amount that a family can receive. And that was, supposedly to improve work incentives, although there's no evidence that it, or very little evidence that it has done. That it's a very sort of crude cap that's applied. There's one level in London and one level outside London, and they don't uprate the level annually, so more and more get kind of pulled into it. And of course, what it means is that some of those children, some of those families who can breathe a sigh of relief because the 2-child limit is no longer there, will then find themselves hit by the cap. Now, the government have been very clear that they're not going to abolish the benefit cap, but there are ways they could at least mitigate it by committing to uprating the level every year in line with the universal credit, and perhaps making good what hasn't been uprated in recent years. And arguably that it shouldn't include child benefit, because if you're in work, the family's going to be getting child benefit. So if you're going to kind of create a level playing field when you compare incomes in and out of work, take child benefit out of the equation. And another thing that's been suggested is that for those with very young children, who are not expected, who with babies or infants, who are not expected to take paid work immediately, then they shouldn't be affected by the cap. So there are a lot of ways you could make it. You could, as I say, you could make it a bit less punitive than it is.
It sounds like, there's definitely, I think you mentioned an important point there as far as this. There's certain prejudices towards that. I know that my colleague who has a number of children, who is on the two cap, he's a working father. He works incredibly hard. And therefore, it's a case of there's a relief that happened as a result of that. They've finally taken this cap away, and that's going to make such a difference to my family. But I know when he posted about that on social media, there was a lot of negativity towards him and I think there is this element of, as you said, you should be able to responsible, only have kids if you could afford them. But circumstances change. Also, hey, we need people having more kids because we're an aging population, and the minute it's not looking good for us as far as when we get there is concerned. But it's also a case of, he loves kids. Yeah. and circumstances change. And I think even if you want to punish the parents, you can't punish the children.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I was going to say, that it's the children. I mean, however much the parents might try and shield their children, and there's a lot of evidence, particularly mothers, but your colleague as well, I'm sure, to make sacrifices to try and shield. But there's only so much you can do, particularly when you're not getting any money at all for some of those children. And the children are not making those choices. And if we believe in the well-being of children and children's rights, then it was called by one academic the worst social policy in history.
That's quite damning, isn't it?
Because there have been some pretty poor ones. So yeah.
I think I sort of see both sides. There's people out there who are still not feeling affluent, who are working very hard. And they see, me and my partner are both working, and we barely get to see our children because we're both working. And then they see the comparison. I think there's always that comparison is death of joy. This case of the system feels unfair. And the problem is, I think the system's always going to feel unfair. You can't please everybody all the time, every day. But as you say, you have to look at priorities and where people are genuinely struggling, and that's where things have to change on that front. So.
Yeah, and often, I mean, because as I said earlier, the majority of children in poverty are in families where at least one parent is in paid work. And there are often very good reasons for why, for those who aren't in paid work, it may be, health problems, disability, quite a lot of children, may have those problems, and makes it that much harder. If you've got a disabled child, then it's much harder to be combining paid work and caring responsibilities, things like that. So, people forget that. I can understand, people do feel, and especially at present when so many people are struggling. But of course, some of those people, they may not realise it, might be able to get some help. Because universal credit is there for working families as well as not working families. And I think that sometimes people just assume that if they're, wage earning, well, then the only thing they can get is child benefit, which is very important. But that too has been cut in, recent years.